All right, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the third installation of Impact from Home, brought to you by Net Impact Amsterdam. So if any of you are new to Net Impact Amsterdam, we're a network organization for young professionals working in the fields of sustainability and impact. So our mission is to help members and the community to increase the depth and the reach of their impact potential. So we facilitate a lot of these types of events. Obviously, it's often in person, but now we've switched to these online events, which have been a lot of fun so far. We've covered impact investing and responsible investing, and today we're going to talk about all things circular economy. And my guest is Andrea Orsag. Did I say your last name correctly?
Perfect.
Great. So Andrea is the co-founder at Mission C, which is a strategy advisory firm based in Amsterdam. And they are on a mission to accelerate the transition to circular economy on a global scale. So she is a consultant with 10 years of experience combining risk management, strategy, and change management across industry, both for the commercial sector and for nonprofit organizations internationally. She also acts as a speaker, guest lecturer, moderator, and facilitator on topics related to the circular economy and sustainability. So I got my reading part done. So now we can get started. So Andrea and I chatted a bit yesterday about what we wanted to cover today. And we thought about kind of starting broad to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to circular economy, and then really getting down into details about strategy, kind of the how we can implement more circular strategies into our businesses. But yeah, we're really hoping that it'll be led by everybody as participants. This is a meeting and not a webinar, so feel free to ask as many questions as you like. So Andrea, why don't we get started? Maybe you can tell us from the very beginning, what is a circular economy? What are the most important components of it?
Thank you so much for having me, Net Impact Amsterdam, and Cathy, and also Andrea. Thanks a lot. Yeah, circular economy is a topic very closely to my heart, and therefore I'm very happy that we can have this conversation, and especially having it with young professionals who are indeed busy with building practices for their own company. And I really do believe circular economy could really play an important role when it comes to future-proofing strategy and building the company also going forward. So very, very simply said, what is circular economy? We know that nowadays everyone's talking about climate crisis, and this is especially due to the rising greenhouse gas emissions that are heating up our planet. And it's already very clear that around 55% of that can be tackled if we switch to renewable energy. And the question is, of course, what do we do with the other half? And that's exactly where circular economy really comes in, because it really seems that half of those emissions can be tackled by better, smarter, more efficient use of the resources and creation of less waste. So by burning waste or sending it to landfills, or very often if it ends in the waterways, this is of course causing a lot of problem, and it also adds to the CO2 emissions rising. So we're talking here about a new way of thinking, new way of designing products, and new way of using products. There are, of course, certain business models that can be applied to make this a reality, so making it a little bit more practical. But pretty much we're talking about creating products that are ready from the scratch, from the design phase, built to last, built to be modular, so they can be upgraded as we need, easy to repair, shared with the others, because let's be really honest, not everyone really needs to own a drill or a projector every day. We can borrow those. Car sharing is becoming very popular. There are concepts like sharing clothes, libraries of things, and so on. And then indeed, we have all the different platforms where this can be exchanged. Over here, you can also think about Airbnb as a concept, at least like at the beginning when it was really a starting phase, and the very original concept behind that. And yeah, renewable resources. And really, instead of wasting something, using it as a secondary resource, hence input for something else.
Yeah, that's perfect. And you mentioned Airbnb, and I know people also tend to think of that as the sharing economy. So again, like all of these buzzwords we tend to hear around this. So what would you say the difference is between circular and sharing? or is it one and the same?
Yeah, I do believe sharing economy is definitely a part of the circular economy, because creating sharing platforms. So again, with kind of like the point that we don't have to own everything. We can rent it, borrow it, lease it, and use it exactly when we need it, instead of having it in our closet or in our parking lot, is the way to go. So concepts where you can rent someone's apartment, and especially for the owners of the apartment, you can actually really nicely utilize your assets better. You're getting more value out of it by offering it to the others, because you are receiving payment in return. So the very original concept of Airbnb is a perfect example of a circular economy. Right. The concept as it is right now, that would be a different discussion.
Yeah, and Andrea in the comments raises a good point. You know, in this kind of post-pandemic world, how do you see people embracing or not the sharing economy? Because now, of course, we're all more, let's say, on edge about sharing things and being really particular about kind of owning our own things, whether it's now driving rather than taking public transportation, or making sure that everything is hygienic. And perhaps that might steer people away from the sharing economy.
That's a very good point, because indeed nowadays this pandemic is of course super unprecedented situation for all of us. All of us here on this call, we have not been alive during any other situation like that before. So of course, hygiene is a big question. However, at the same time, hygiene has to be always a big question. When we're talking about sharing economy, hygiene should be always a priority. Talking about sharing clothes, obviously somebody has been wearing it before, but there are ways how to properly clean them, right? And the same goes for instance, the secondhand stores. And pretty much the idea already many years ago, a few years back, the conversation was, oh, I'm not really a big fan of secondhand clothes because somebody's been already wearing it. And of course, there are certain fluids, let's be really honest, people sweat, people wear it with the use. People are really worried that that's gonna somehow get onto their body. However, just think about, how do you do conventional shopping in a store, or even if it's online? There are probably quite some people who already tried it on before you. You're probably not the very first person having it on. So hygiene has been really important before, and I think the current situation highlights the importance of it even more. The same goes for renting a car. So not owning a car, but borrowing something. Actually, that's my case for the next week, because I never ever in my life owned a car. And now, of course, being in the Netherlands, we really want to travel around, and we thought instead of using train, let's just rent a car. So I really hope that a company we're renting from really prioritize hygiene. And I do believe this is actually a perfect time in terms of highlighting hygiene, its importance, and really holding people accountable for it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, Camila asks as well, and I think this is something I mentioned to you before as well, Andrea, which is, how do we prevent circular products simply adding to the consumption stream rather than replacing an existing one? So for example, now that I've been able to rent this very expensive dress that I otherwise would have bought, I can still buy all of these other clothes. So I'm not actually consuming less, but it's allowing me to actually consume more because I'm renting a few things that I would have otherwise purchased.
Yes, that's true. You will have more finances available, of course, for any other purchases. At the same time, when we look at the dress that you rented, it's going to go back into the circulation after your time you rented it for. And hence it can be rented and used by somebody else. And this is what we need to realize. The fact that a product is at the end of its use, that doesn't mean that it's at the end of the life cycle of the product. So maybe you're done with it, but that doesn't mean it's a waste. For somebody else, it could be just a perfect product they can still continue using. So mindset is very important here. And indeed, this is also one of the biggest barriers when it comes to really applying circular economy, scaling it up faster. It's really the culture, it's really the mindset, because very simply said, up till now, we just so got into the linear economy and buying and throwing away that we need to change that and realize there is another way.
Yeah, that's great. So maybe shifting a bit from the consumer perspective to the really the business perspective and how we incorporate circular strategies in the business. Can you point to any businesses that are doing well in this area? And maybe even it could be handy for us to know of a business that did poorly. So an already established business that tried to bring on circular strategies either successfully or unsuccessfully.
I do believe it's very important to have strong business cases, because seeing that this works is helping other companies to decide to step onto this journey as well. Here in the Netherlands, there are quite some businesses that actually really decided to go that way. I see Rick is entering Machines over there. Yeah, that's a really nice example. Machins is of course still not a large corporation, and since many people work for corporations here, and large corporations also, if they can change something, their impact is absolutely tremendous. Let me pick as an example Philips. Why I think this is a good example? Well, they've been busy with their circular economy programs for, I think it's the 8th year this year actually, really figuring out what does it mean, how they could apply it. So starting small and building it up, and actually they have it directly into their strategy in the form of a goal. So what's their goal for year 2020? They have a goal to have 15% of the revenues coming from circular products and services. 15% maybe for some people is not a big enough number. However, I would say if we really look at how many companies have such goals already directly in their strategy, it's not that many. So I would say that's a perfect goal. And especially the fact that it's directly in the strategy gives it, of course, the importance. And I was just deep diving through their annual report, and for last year, they were able to get to 13% already. So that's pretty impressive. A year before that, it was 12%. And 12% or 30% of Philips revenue is, well, a figure way beyond 2 billion euros. So I would say that's definitely a great example. Then of course, like how they're doing it, because when we hear Philips, very often people think, at least like the people who've been busy with circular economy, think of light as a service. However, that's a division of Philips that's right now for a few years now a separate one called Signify, so the lighting division of Philips. And Philips, as we know it right now, those years, is focusing on the healthcare, and it's exactly refurbishing, taking back of the appliances such as like MRI machines, scanning for the injuries and in the brain, for instance, and also using recycled components in consumer goods. So for instance, coffee machines that are made of certain parts coming from the plastics, and they're calculating that circular products are the ones that have at least 25–30% of recovered post-consumer materials.
Yeah, that's great. I think Andrea makes a good point in the comments that maybe circular is more, yeah, it can be quite easily attainable, I guess, if you're in manufacturing goods. But are there any examples outside of manufacturing from a business perspective where you saw that they were able to bring on these types of strategies?
Mm-hmm. So absolutely, if you're a company using, selling, producing goods, of course, this is where you focus on how to really get it back, how to be the one in charge of knowing the materials, design, be able to reuse it, cycle it as needed. However, if you're a servicing company, there are quite some options as well. Of course, if we're talking about servicing companies such as financial services, over there, you don't really have a physical product. And it really depends on industry. For financial industry, the biggest focus would be where do they invest money? A really obvious one. I know you and the teams have been busy with it. Yeah, and are busy with it pretty much like on a daily basis. So it's really, where do we invest? Where does the money go? Because it's finance, it's a very important resource that has a huge potential to help us accelerate the transition. If you're talking about, again, a company that's maybe having goods as a main product, we could also look into how do they deal with their customers? How do they build relationships? Because it's very different if I have, for instance, jeans and I sell them to you. And then I probably never see you again. Whereas building relationship where I'm leasing you the jeans and I'm still the one who owns the fabric in those jeans, and you're paying me a lease for those jeans on monthly basis, and then you're getting discount if you want to replace them, or if you want a new model, we're going to take them back. You can get extra discount for new subscriptions. It's a different way how to build relationships as well. And then when it comes to sharing platforms, this is how you can ensure that you're getting even more value out of the assets you own. So let's say you probably heard about platform Peerby. That is for people who own different assets, machines, and other consumers such as you or me can very simply rent it for a limited period of the time. And there is a win-win situation because I'm getting something I need perhaps for a few hours or a few days, and the owner of the asset is actually getting a part of his costs or her costs paid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So everyone is making my job super easy by asking a ton of great questions in the comments.
Super.
So I'm going to try not to miss any of them. So Nuno asks, what is missing on getting the big brands and corporations on board and making it mainstream, taking the argument that a circular model is both feasible and profit-led?
Yeah, this is a perfect question. And I really hope that, yeah, in a few years, we will be answering it differently. Right now, as I mentioned, we are very simply living in a linear economy. Let's be very honest. According to the Global Circularity Gap Report, only 8.6%, so let's say 9%, just to round it up, of the world is circular, meaning over 90% is not. And of course, that's kind of creating the mainstream thinking all around. It's very easy to function in the system that everyone knows and feels comfortable with. If a business figured out a business model based on linear business model that works for them, and especially if it's focusing purely on a profit, I can imagine changing the shift in their mind that now I should do something circular. It's very simply poses a risk for them. We don't know whether our customers will like it. Will the new products based on circularity principles work? This new way of how we are offering our products, there is a different cash flow because of course, if you sell something, you get the money right away. However, if you're leasing something, if you're offering light as a service, for instance, the cash flow is very different because you're getting partial payments on a monthly or quarterly basis, and the contracts are really long-term. Mm-hmm. So I think quite some businesses are still worried that they don't have it right from the first scratch. They try it, so there's a lot of research and development involved, a lot of piloting, trying it out, seeing what works, embedding lessons learned into that. And of course, it's way easier to do that if you already have a very strong business case that is especially within a business model that can be directly applied also to your company. Mm-hmm. So that's one. It's a little bit of fear and especially risk management because we feel comfortable with what we know. Culture is a really big part of that because very often, especially the large corporates, of course, they are responsible for paying return on investment to their shareholders. Of course, there are other stakeholders as well, employees and so on. So they are responsible for paying them salaries and so on. And I think many companies are still having a huge question mark when it comes to circular economy. They're wondering what's going to be the support from the regulators, which has been missing in the past years. And I really believe that right now with the European Green Deal and recovery package, it's a little bit of more hope that more regulation is coming. Companies, but especially countries and even municipalities, even at the city level, for instance, City of Amsterdam, are really setting clear goals linked to circular economy and making it their strategy. And I think this is what we needed in the last years. It's coming now. So I really hope that a conversation in 5 years, let's say, would be very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I'm going to scroll. There was one question from Rick that I wanted to ask. Here. So he says, some studies show that for some material flows, recycling actually has a larger environmental impact than using virgin materials. Do you take the view that everyone should be circular in the future or that some product flows will remain linear?
I do believe one way or another, there's going to be always some waste, but if it's within the limits that we can still deal with, or waste in a sense that we can still downcycle, meaning it's not a waste in the traditional terminology, but we can, for instance, use it as a filling for isolation. I'm talking, for instance, about really, really old clothes and so on. But of course, there are some materials such as like aluminium that can be recycled endlessly. 75% since it's been produced, it's still in a circulation. Whereas of course, if we're talking about plastics, it's maybe 1-2 times we can recycle it. At the same time, saying that doesn't mean that all the plastic is bad. Talking about the hygiene, which was a previous question, it's actually playing a very important role to help us safeguard the nutrition, but also making it a little bit more clear and hygiene for us. So I think it's about really carefully looking into the materials. What are the options? What is the life cycle analysis? But also what is the value add of all the different materials we would like to use?
Yeah, I'm sure, as you said, it's a bit of how easy it is to obtain these virgin materials. Are they abundant? Can they be regenerated in nature easily? Yeah. So
You're
I'm
absolutely
sure there's
right.
lots of questions.
Absolutely right. And indeed, also, do we know where do they come from? Do we know what is the composition of those materials? Can we actually get them back easily? Is there already infrastructure in place that can help us to recycle them, upcycle them, and reuse them? So again, here in Amsterdam, there are quite some amazing startups and scale-ups working on that. There's, for instance, Access Material Exchange platform that is literally having a purpose of matching the demand of supply of all the different byproducts and materials for different industries and sectors.
Yeah, that's great. Great, thanks, Rick, for that question. Next one, Matthew, what are the business model options to enable circular economy? Is servitization of business models from selling products to a service the key to circular economy?
I would say it's difficult to say it's the key. It's definitely not one model fits all. So for some companies, it will be the way to go forward. It's instead of selling it, servitizing it, indeed, definitely. But for some other businesses, some other sectors, or maybe some other concept, a different business model might be actually way more suitable. It really, really depends. It's not one model fits all. That's important to keep in mind. Therefore, if we see that something works, it's very important to also have a look whether this is applicable for me, my industry, whether it's in line with my goals, my customer base, what type of segment of the market am I operating in, who's my target audience, because yeah, different segments, different markets require different solutions.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
For some, it's got to be a perfect solution.
And there was an earlier question, I forget who asked it, but I missed it. I think this segues into what you were saying about whether circular economy can also work in developing countries. And I'm sure it's a lot of what you said is that it's really going to depend on how you roll it out, and that it's not a one size fits all solution.
I would say for developing countries, there is even a potential to leapfrog. So we were talking about leapfrogging in terms of applying new technologies, because they don't have to go in terms of phones, for instance, through the traditional old line lines. They can straight switch to mobile phones, and they did. So that was a great proof that it works. And when it comes to circular economy, well, the big problem with the linear is indeed extraction of virgin materials, very often not knowing where does it come from, what are the components, transparency lacking. We know technical problems, kids' work being involved there and so on. Or it's like if you're starting something from scratch, and in developing countries, yeah, for quite a lot of industries, there's such a space for improvements, and therefore they can directly start with the new businesses implementing circularity. It's going to be not only good for their profit and society, but in the end also for environment, not creating the environmental waste and pollution that we in developed world created.
Yeah, that's a great point. So great discussions happening in the group chat. I thank you everybody for your participation. There was so a bit of a discussion that steered towards policy, and Andrea asked, what kind of policy levers do you think would be most effective at steering businesses toward a circular model? Any good examples of governments starting to subsidize or tax different areas of the business?
That's a great question, because I personally think regulatory frameworks are absolutely crucial to make this happen. It's just this needed nudge telling people where the bigger part of the economy, meaning like really on the national level, is moving. What's the trend? What direction do they want to go? So if we take as an example the Dutch government, they have a very clear goal to become circular, 100% circular by year 2050 and 50% circular by year 2030. And of course, how to get there, you very clearly need strong policies, strong guidelines, strong regulatory frameworks, definitely subsidies. I do believe you also needs to make it very clear to all those polluters and companies that are not compliant that they will have to pay if they're not compliant. And you have to create a strong roadmap. And what I understood, the Dutch government is busy with creating a roadmap how to get there right now. I know that RWO, Rijksoverheid, they already are offering a couple of subsidies to all the different experimental research, for instance. And there are already quite some funds available, and the second chamber of the parliament is busy with it. So there's quite a lot happening, I would say. Of course, all of us wish it would go a little bit faster. If we have a look at the cities, so City of Amsterdam launched their circular economy strategy for the city, following even the donut of Kay Ravert, the economist from UK. And I do believe that all those are just perfect examples that it's happening. City of Rotterdam, and there are many other cities, of course, outside of Netherlands, really exploring this concept and keen to push it forward. At the same time, of course, what does it matter if a small country such as like Netherlands is changing something? However, you probably heard that literally yesterday there was a really good draft, just waiting for some, I think, last 4 countries to have it approved. The recovery plan on the European Union level, directly published by the European Commission on recovery, where European Green Deal, and a big part of the European Green Deal will be action plan towards circular economy. They actually launched it already in March this year. So right now, of course, the goal is to make it a little bit more specific. However, already right now, we can see that there's quite a lot of information available, like the new circular economy will be having measures to how to make sustainable products the norm within the European Union, how to empower consumers and public buyers, what sectors are the ones to really focus on when we want to make circularity a little bit faster, and create all those great case studies. That's got to be really great example for the others. So I know that electronics, ICT are a big part of that, batteries, packaging, plastics plays quite a huge role there, textiles as well, construction, food, water, nutrition. There's actually a very clear strategy on farm to fork on agriculture and how to embed circularity and sustainability principles over there. There is quite a big budget that's going to be invested into growing biodiversity. So talking about the regeneration, that's going to be really, really crucial. I do believe it's happening. We're literally in the midst of that. And I'm a strong believer that in the coming months and years, there's going to be a tremendous change.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time. I definitely agree. And thank you for answering all these rapid fire questions, by the way.
It's nice. I'm loving it. I'm just so very happy. So many people are interested in that. And every single question was just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, we have quite a few more. So I'll try and we'll see how many we can get through here. So Cathy builds on Andrea's question. So there's 2 Cathys and 2 Andreas here. Cathy from Gressip says, in lots of cases, obstacles to circularity arise because of requirements, especially in construction. You may have to go through lots of hoops to prove that the materials you're using are of the same quality and meet the requirements set by a contract. And even then, governmental specifications may require the use of virgin materials. How do you see this changing?
I have to admit, I'm definitely not an expert on construction sector, so apologies up front, just to manage expectations a little bit. I've heard that though. We've been discussing with some people, busy bringing circular economy into the construction sector, and I would say a big challenge is indeed in how the contracts and procurement rules are being written. And that's not only the case for construction business. So that's the case also for financial services. So many claim that they want to support circular business. However, when such businesses are coming with their business plan where the cash flow due to servicing instead of selling the product directly is different, this is very simply not accounted for. So we really need to change those policies. And I do believe right now construction having such a prominent place in the national policies in terms of accelerating circular economy, and also international on the European Commission level. I would really think that that's got to be a perfect nudge for something to change. It has to change. We need to make it easier rather than complicated. And of course, easier in a sense that not everything has to easily pass as ticking the circular economy boxes. It needs to be done very carefully with a lot of research, life cycle analysis, and really knowing what's the impact, just so we're not creating even more waste with those new solutions and products.
Yeah, yes, definitely. I'm going to put somebody on the spot now. Zubin, I believe that's how you pronounce your name. There seems to be a great discussion going on, which is started by one of the questions that you had in the chat box. I don't know if you're able to put yourself off mute and maybe talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, so we're trying to set up, we are setting up a design bureau focused on sustainability. And last week we did a workshop on so we made a low emissions design tool. Circularity is for a lot of companies, it's like upending your whole business model. Whereas if you start from let's say lowering emissions, and that lowering emissions could lead you to let's say servitization, less material usage. Also, look at your production of the amount of emissions in your production, in transportation. Could you be also reducing your emissions by, let's say, reusing, repairing? How do you? So it's easier to let's say put those things in or integrate those things in your current business model. But when you start talking about circularity, and especially from companies which are not so big, it's like the whole world starts. Yeah, it's very difficult to start working on. That's what we sort of thought of, and that's what we have experienced of talking to people. So yeah, that's what I was.
That's like super interesting, Zubin, and thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, really very valid point. Again, it really is not one model fits all. I can imagine for a smaller company, especially keeping a good track of what are the CO2 emissions or water usage. It's a perfect start actually. So really starting with embedding more renewable energy, maybe some efficiency and so on. But again, renewable energy and those efficiencies can get us only as far. And that's exactly circular economy being a perfect, how to say that, perfect complementary way to go. And yeah, if it's easier for them to really start there, I would say just starting is exactly the most important step. We have to start somewhere. And then if they really figure out like, okay, we were able to significantly reduce our CO2 from energy efficiencies, and we were able to control better our water usage and the recirculation of the water, for instance, we can start looking into our supply chain. It will be really up to all the different companies to decide what is a priority for them. That's why embedding it into a strategy is so important, because if we have just one department being busy with that, if it's not a part of the strategy, it's very simply not prioritized. If there's an unprecedented situation, suddenly it's being shifted away from the focus. If it's, however, in the strategy, and especially if the company really creates clear goals and creates a roadmap on how they're going to do that, it's a great signal for all the different departments, functions across those departments, what to focus on, and it needs to be a part of everyone's job description in the end, so everyone needs to be involved. And then indeed, depending on who's looking, if we're talking about engineers, if we're talking about procurement, everyone has a different role to play in that. So I would say just starting somewhere is the most important thing. Decide what you would like to start deep diving it. And Once you figure that out, pick up another area where you can embed it. But please make sure that the leadership agrees that's the way to go. It's important to them. They understand why it's important to them and why it's good for planet, profit, and the society, and start from there.
Yeah, it's a great point. And maybe to segue from that, we spoke yesterday, Andrea, about how are people actually evaluating, how are they measuring exactly how circular they are? So how can companies go about doing this? Like, where do you start to measure? What do you measure, and how would you go about doing that?
Yeah. Measuring is super important. I think all of us being business professionals understand that, because if we can't measure it, it's really difficult to see whether there's a progress and whether we're going in the right way. So having certain data, having a baseline, and being able to confirm it, to compare it to where we are right now and where we are within 2 years, really help us to evaluate whether we're doing it right or something else needs adjustments. If it's a big company, typically there is quite a lot of measuring happening already, financial performance and all the different metrics. We know very well that there is GRI, ESG, CDP reporting, and so on. And I would say, why not to make this a really good start? So let's start from what we already have, and then let's start looking especially into our supply chain. This is where a majority of the impact really comes from. It's the production of the product. So it's not plastic packaging, as many people very often think, because of course, for us consumers, it's what do we see? So it's very simple to imagine that, yeah, this plastic packaging is actually the biggest problem, but it's really the production, it's the materials, it's the resources we're using to produce those products. So let's start over there. Let's start deep diving through our supply chain. Again, procurement is going to play absolutely crucial role there. Who are our suppliers? What do we know about them? What do they know about their sub-suppliers? What are the materials they're using? Are there any certifications? What are the labor conditions there? How about the transport? Are there any other options? Do we have the opportunities within procurement to really go for new suppliers that are able to provide more transparency? What are the materials? Are there other options? How about the CO2 emissions, water use? And then indeed, what's the composition? Is it easy to collect it in the end? Is it easy to rework it into new products? Can we upcycle it easily, or is it made from material that's difficult to upcycle? If we take as an example, textiles. So if something is made out of cotton, we can calculate what is the water use, what's the CO2, and so on. Cotton at the end of the life cycle is relatively easily, I'm very carefully using relatively easily, recyclable, because it's like one monotextile, and yeah, it can be shredded down and recreated fabric out of it that can be used for new products. The same goes for polyester. So as for good news, polyester can be quite easily recycled, and the price range of the recycled and virgin one is getting almost a really great tipping point where they're super comparable. The quality is super comparable, so that sounds like a good news. But then if we have a specialist sweater that's made out of 4 different components, so it's like acrylic, polyester, cotton, and then it has like silk or anything else into that, it's very difficult to really sort it out and decide like how we are going to get those components out of it to recreate something else out of it.
Yeah, so I think the short answer is it's complex, but it's doable.
Great sum up, Cathy. Yes.
Yeah. Great. So Rick has an interesting question. He said, vested interests from incumbents is one of the biggest barriers to circular thinking. Is it regulation or disruption that will overcome this? Now we're just trying to stump you because you've been answering all of our questions so well.
Someone asked me quite a similar question, not exactly the same, but quite a similar question quite recently. And disruption. I mean, disruption is great because it has a potential to completely change everything. However, if the regulation is limiting this disruption, or if it's even taking it for something that's not compliant and not desired, the disruption will have a problem, even to the point that the disruptor can go to a jail. So I would say the disruption is possible only within the limits of the regulation, typically. Hence, destruction can thrive and can be even bigger and more beneficial if it's actually in line with a regulation. So regulation is quite important here. Talking about hazardous materials, someone mentioned it there over there in the chat as well. Yeah, there were quite some products. If we take, for instance, black bear carbon, I don't know if you heard of that. It's retracting the black bear carbon coloring the pigment out of old tires and yeah, kind of using it for new tires. However, due to regulatory and restrictions, it's quite difficult to scale it up nowadays. So yeah.
Interesting. So we're already at 1:45, so I'm just going to pick maybe a couple more questions. And there's so many. I'm scrolling back to Nuno had a question. How big should be the investment in the next 5 years regarding education and knowledge transfer around circularity?
I really don't have the right number for you, Nuno. I'm really sorry. I don't know what's the investment needed. I would say there's definitely some investment within the European Union funds driven by the European Commission. That's going to be well, directly focusing on that area. But yeah, it's not only how big will be the investment, it's also like what channels will be utilized to really get the right message to everyone, because it's still lacking. And in the end, consumers are becoming more aware. But then like if it's you and me and this whole group we have here that's aware of that and we're changing something, that's beautiful. However, it's going to be, I don't know, 20 people. If a big company having international operations all over the globe can change how they are using their products, how they're using the design to drive the circularity, the impact's going to be way, way, way different. And if the companies are the ones helping us to make our lifestyle choices easier, that would be an absolutely beautiful world. So I unfortunately really don't have a number for you.
But enough, I guess. Enough that we can educate more and more people on the topic. And I think starting education earlier, especially yeah, at the university or college level, when we're training engineers and scientists to think about what they do more circularly, it's a great place to start too.
I'm happy to see that there are master programs being created where this is actually a big part. And actually talking about fashion again, there is this like Amsterdam Fashion Institute here in Amsterdam. They actually incorporated really nicely circular economy into the design studies. So the young designers were up till now, the focus was on absolutely beautiful designs or like groundbreaking designs. Have also lectures understanding how they have such a huge role to play because their designs are driving the trends. Hence, in terms of raising awareness, that's very important.
Yeah. And oh, just to add on to our discussion on metrics, Rick asked if you could point us to the best existing standards at the moment for circular economy. So are there already best metrics in practice to measure this?
I would start with a tool by Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Generally speaking, Ellen MacArthur Foundation is absolutely fabulous source when it comes to circular economy news, whether we're talking those best practices, all the different startups, scale-ups, or corporations sharing their insights, what is it that they do. And they actually quite recently came up also with metrics, how to measure circular economy. Very happy to share with you the link afterwards.
Wonderful. Okay. I like Andrea's question here. What are you most excited about for the future of circularity? What inspires you despite the challenges?
What inspires me we can breathe fresh air. We aren't having our apartments filled with a lot of stuff that's just collecting dust. And I do believe the less things will allow us to have more time for what really matters, our family, ourselves, our friends, and enjoying life and beautiful nature that will thrive because we will be acting more responsibly and we will be able to regenerate it so it can thrive. And healthy planet, healthy people, happy people.
That's great. That's great. And maybe I have one last question maybe a bit of a naive one, but if there is a business that wants to incorporate more circular strategies into what they do, how is this happening now? So is there new departments or positions being created? Is there a head of circularity now in businesses? Or like, how do people really go about doing this? Or do they hire external consultants most of the time?
There are different ways how to do that. So of course you can always have internal departments. Very often it starts in a CSR department or sustainability manager, and kind of like a team around that position. However, it's also very handy if there are the discussions happening on the procurement level, and what we are noticing, it's quite a lot of discussion happening on a marketing and PR level, because companies are smart and they're realizing that this is a trend they don't want to miss. They also want to hop on a train. Unfortunately, very often it's a little bit too much PR and marketing without really tangible action. So it's great if it's kind of like a one-off collection or a one-off beautiful product. However, it needs to be integrated in the business model and in the strategy. It needs to be something lasting. So it can be done internally if there are people who have strong leadership and can really convince the people on the top that this is what works, this is what brings benefits and creates added value for the whole chain of stakeholders, in the end being a perfect win-win for planet, profit, and people. However, of course, there are quite some consulting agencies being busy with that. They can hire to make it perhaps a little bit faster, because those people are typically bringing on board already some sort of experience and insights and lessons learned, and can share best practices and help people leading the change within the organization to make it more smooth with some additional outsider look. There are also quite some institutions and organizations busy with that, providing knowledge where people, all of us, can just go and find already what are the best practices and okay, what are the business models, and learn about the topic a little bit more. And then I know there are quite some people who are right now responsible for doing research for their company. How can we change something in terms of becoming more circular? So I would say all of that is really needed. And again, it's really up to a company to decide what would be the best fit for them, what works the best for them.
Yeah, that's great.
It's available.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. That was such a wonderful discussion. And thank you to everybody who participated in the chat. I hope I was able to get to most of the questions. There was quite a few, but I'm sure if you want to reach out to Andrea, you can. She's on LinkedIn, and you can also check out Mission C if you have any other questions there. And yeah, please do, if you're not already a member of Net Impact Amsterdam, you can join by the link that Andrea Palmer has put in the chat box. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Andrea. That was really wonderful. And we'll see you in the next Impact from Home episode.
Thank you so much for having me, Cathy. And thank you all for a great question. Super enjoyed this discussion. Bye-bye. Enjoy the weekend.